The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday afternoon here in Puerto Rico. I hope everybody's having a great weekend, ready to have the rest of a great weekend and then a great week. All right, today we're doing our Ask Me Anything show, and we've got our panelists here, contributors who do $25 or more a month are eligible to participate live. But of course, all of you on the chat can still ask questions. The super chat is open and available. Let's see. What did I mention before we get going? Two quick things. We got two sponsors of the show. One is expressvpn.com, and you can, if you sign up on expressvpn.com/Yaron, you get 3 months extra use free on ExpressVPN. I use ExpressVPN when I travel, sometimes when I do financial transactions, or when I want to see Sling and I'm in another country, if I want to see my TV. So really useful, and an extra layer of protection if you want some additional privacy. I think of all the VPNs out there, ExpressVPN is probably the most well-known and probably among the best. It's the one I use. And the second sponsor is the Ayn Rand University. If you're interested in studying Objectivism, if you're interested in auditing classes or actually being a student, it is a fantastic opportunity. You're getting the best educators active today in Objectivism as your professors. I encourage everybody to sign up, and I will be teaching a course on verbal communication in the summer, and there'll be a beginner's course and an intermediate level course, and you can sign up for the intermediate class and you can audit it, or you can sign up as a paying student, and then you'll get to hear my critique, friendly, I promise, or not so friendly, we'll see, of your presentation. So those are our sponsors. I think the Ayn Rand Institute is going to create a whole page of special offers for YBS listeners. So stay tuned with discounts and different things, and encourage you to participate in different things. You'll be able to get free books. So stay tuned. We're working on that. Hopefully that'll happen soon. Of course, if you're going to OCON, let me know. Some of you I know applied for scholarships. I think some of you were approved. You should be hearing from the Ayn Rand Institute about the scholarships. I was not involved. I just passed on the scholarships to them, but I think a few of you were already approved. I don't think there's any more scholarships to be had, but if you are going to OCON and you're going to be there, then we'll probably do like a Yaron Brook Show get together during the conference. So please come to OCON. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a blast. Friend Harper says I would pay money to have Yaron Brook yell at me in real time. Easy. Sign up for the course on public speaking. I promise. I pretty much yell at everybody, but I promise to yell at you in particular and make a particular effort to be yelling at you. All right. So the way we do this is our panel gets to ask questions, and then we go to the super chat questions. We do have a usual goal of raising $650. So if you want to help the show, if you want to support the show, this is a great time to do it, both by asking questions and by just using a sticker to support the show. There's such a thing as stickers in YouTube. Also, just to add to the complexity of everything, tomorrow I'll be doing a members only show. 1 p.m. East Coast time. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. East Coast time. I was going to do it 12 p.m. East Coast time, but I felt sorry for the West Coasters. Didn't want to do too early on a Sunday morning. So 1 p.m. East Coast time, we will be doing a we'll be doing a members-only show. The topic of the show is Yaron's State of the Union. So I'm going to be giving you if I were president, what would be my State of the Union address? What would be the legislation I would be proposing? What would be my identification of the issues and problems and challenges facing the United States? So it'll be all political. It'll be pure fantasy, and it'll be a lot of fun. So join us. And if you're not a member yet, I see a few people in the chat who are not members yet. I'm not sure what their issue is, but you can become a member pretty easily by clicking the join button there and committing to something like $5 a month, and you can become a member. And if you do it now, you can join us tomorrow for the members only show. All right. I think I see we have a full slate of people here. So let's get started. I'm going to do this based on how you guys appear on my screen. We'll start with Adam. Adam, you're muted. Adam. All right, we'll come back to you, Adam. How about that?
No,
there you are. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm partially disabled and I need to use a trackball to get to the unmute button. So
Okay.
Sorry about the delay. I was looking up something, but the first thing I want to say is, yes, I'm coming to Okan.
Excellent.
And since we met at the National Gallery in Washington, I know that you are also interested in sculpture. And on my way to Okan, I'm going to spend 3 days going through Brookgreen Gardens.
Oh my God.
I don't know whether you know it.
That is yeah, of course I know it. I've been to Brookgreen Gardens at least 4 times. I think 4 times. It is one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth. It is in South Carolina, just north of, it's about an hour drive north of Charleston, South Carolina. It is a former plantation that in the late 19th century was converted into a sculpture studio and sculpture garden for the wife of Huntington. I forget his first name, but Huntington, who was an American industrialist, one of the richest people in America. He bought this plantation. His wife was a sculptor, a very good sculptor. You'll see a number of her sculptures there at Brookgreen Gardens. And she basically made it a sculpture garden for American sculptors. So almost all the sculptures there are American, many of them immigrants, but Americans. So you see their sculptures by sculptors you've never heard of, you didn't know of because they're not in other museums. But what makes it special is that the sculptures are laid out in the gardens of the plantation. So they're beautiful gardens. So even if there was no sculptures there, it would be a beautiful place to go to because of the gardens. And then you put in sculptures into it, and it's just magnificent. The little ponds and the magnificent sculptures on the greens. And there are over 400 sculptures at Brookgreen Gardens, at least as of a few years ago. I'd say 3/4 of them are good. A certain percentage of them are excellent. And just the setting and the atmosphere and the whole thing is beautiful. Take your time, do it slowly. If I don't know if this is available in the spring, but if by chance the gardens are available open at night in the dark, definitely go. So we by accident once. We were at Brookgreen Gardens over New Year's, and they did a night thing at one evening, and it was stunning. if there's a legitimate concept called magical, and it probably is, it was magical. It just the lighting on the sculptures, the trees, the shrubbery, the gardens, the atmosphere at night was it was just a unique experience. It was one of my most striking aesthetic experience I've ever had was Brookgreen Gardens at night. But Brookgreen Gardens generally amazing. I've been there again 3 or 4 times. I can't remember. But yes, first time I was there was 1989. That was the first time I was there. Anyway, yes. So that's wonderful, Adam. Enjoy. You can have a blast.
Thank you. And I'll wait on the other 2 questions until other people have been asking theirs.
Sounds good. All right, Richard.
Hey, Ron.
Nice to see you, Richard. I think this is your first time on.
I think I was on one before, but
Okay.
yeah, it's great to be on. But I was just getting curious about your take on this. I'm working as part of one of the classes I'm taking this semester. We're not working with any classified intel, but basically the project that we're given is to present to the DoD presentation about some issue that they're concerned with. And the one that they gave our group was supply chains, and specifically supply chain resiliency. So that was really helpful for the microelectronics section, having read Chip Wars. But it seems to me very obvious, as you covered on the show, the biggest issues here are regulatory ones. Immigration is one, but there's a lot of processing facilities that are actually built in the United States, but they can't operate yet because they don't have the requisite permits from all the environmental czars. So in terms of framing this to a defense-minded audience, how would you recommend framing it in a way that's conducive to, like, this is a national security imperative, and here's why you guys need to care about this?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of ways in which to approach the whole issue of more resilient supply chains. But first, in terms of national security, I mean, the thing is that these are real, assuming these are real national security issues, right? The sad thing is that so many things are framed in terms of national security that have nothing to do with national security, like tariffs on steel or tariffs on automobiles. I mean, the fact that we're buying BMWs, supposedly, according to Trump, was a national security threat to America. So assuming it's a real national security issues, I don't know, chips for missiles, steel for building tanks, the capacity to build tanks. So the first thing is, when the time comes to do this, when war comes, particularly in the 21st century, it might happen so quickly that you won't have time then to ask permission for all the regulatory and all the BS stuff that is bottlenecking or restricting your ability to do anything today. So get it done in advance. Now's the time. The faster you do it, the better. Human life's at stake. Whatever regulatory, environmental stuff they might pull at you in terms of, oh, it'll poison this, it'll do that. It's irrelevant in the face of potential deaths of millions and millions of people in an actual war, in a kind of national security emergency. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, then you have to identify, okay, what are the real risks in terms of supply chains? Because the fact is, stuff can get very quickly to the United States very quickly from a lot of places around the world, and you don't actually have to manufacture everything in the US. The question is, what are the national security issues? One is, you don't want to be dependent on a country that you might be at war with, i.e. China, Russia, and you would have to have a whole list of countries where you fear you might be at war with. So things that are national security issues should not be made in those countries. And again, you have to be very careful in making sure that what you're dealing with is real national security. Second, are there risks of things that are national security dependent are made far away? Can the planes and the ships bringing them to the United States be destroyed? Are they at risk? And to what extent is that risk serious? Is that a serious risk? If it is, then bring them closer. So, for example, Canada is a great place to outsource certain national security things. I don't know what the Canadians are particularly good at, but whatever it is that they can compete with Americans at, we shouldn't have any national security concerns about building stuff in Canada. Should we have national security concerns about Mexico? I think more than Canada, less than a lot of other places, right? Because they're close. We could always invade, right? And get the stuff by force if we needed to. But you can imagine a scenario where Mexico is aligned with one of our enemies. Canada, very unlikely. Mexico, maybe likely. But I think it's a low probability, right? And then you could rank countries based on stuff like that. So there's something.
And the risk of Mexico getting things leaked is probably higher. Their cybersecurity might not be as sophisticated as Canada or the United States.
Sure. But again, you could provide at least the particular facilities. And then the question is, so there's a whole issue of friend shoring, which I like. I mean, make sure that things that you believe are national security dependent are being made by friends, by allies, by people you think will never go to war with us and are never going to be a national security threat. And then the second issue is for things that you think are crucial to be made in the United States, and but that you're worried that we currently don't have the capacity, or if we went to war, it would be too hard to ramp up capacity. Then build that capacity now. Use the defense budget to build that capacity. You could build it. You could give the money to private companies to build that capacity and mothball it. That is, mothball it with a commitment to update it regularly to make it so it's state of the art constantly. But it should be mothballed. It shouldn't be used for producing stuff that competes with everybody else. It shouldn't be used for private sector, and it should get no benefits. It should be sitting there. In a sense, the Defense Department should pay private industry to build mothballed facilities for emergencies, like maybe tank things and chip manufacturing and things like that. But they shouldn't be used. And then maybe with chips, what you need to do, because you need them on an ongoing basis, I mentioned this the other day, is you want to make sure that in the United States, there is a plant that can supply the Defense Department with all the chips they need, no matter what, anytime. And given the time to ramp up, it's very difficult. Given the technology ramp up, it's very difficult. Now, luckily, most of the chip manufacturing technologies are with friends, Japan, Taiwan, the Netherlands. But imagine Taiwan, there's a war in Taiwan, Japan's being nuked. So you've got to have some capacity in the US. Again, maybe it's mothballed. I suggest probably it's not mothballed. They produce just for the Defense Department. That's what they do. And maybe it's owned by TSMC. It doesn't have to be owned by an American company, but it has to be based in the US. But real strategic thinking has to be going to, what do we need? How much of it do we need? When do we need it? What are supply chains? How sensitive and how vulnerable are they? And I suspect, unfortunately, that nobody in the Defense Department does this kind of strategic thinking, sadly, because they don't do it for anything else. There doesn't seem to be much strategy, foreign policy-wise, in the U.S. government.
No, that's great. And it does seem like they're thinking about it, at least, or they're trying to get.
Yeah, they know it's an issue.
So
Then it's an issue. Whether they can actually create strategy is a different question.
Thanks.
Sure. Stephen.
So I'm going to start with a statement, and please correct me if my statement's wrong. So Ayn Rand viewed consciousness and existence as a duality. Am I correct?
Yes. Although
Okay.
consciousness exists in existence, right? Consciousness is an existence.
Yes. Right. All right. And new to objectivism, coming from pseudo, if you will, Catholicism / Buddhism, the Buddhist application of this is that consciousness and existence, there's a non-duality. It's a one. Yes. And so I think I'm correct with that statement. That said, how would an objectivist approach mindfulness meditation, and the benefit I think that you get from a type of a mindfulness meditation practice.
Sure. So to the extent that I understand what mindfulness is, and this might be an area in which I'm partially ignorant at least, I consider mindfulness a way of resting your consciousness, resting your mind. Your mind is active all day. It is exerting huge amounts of energy. I mean, I forget the number, but the percent of calories burnt by the actual brain is astounding, because it's busy and it's doing a lot of things. And sleep is part of that, is an important part of resetting the brain and providing it with rest but I think mindfulness during the day can be a way of doing that reset, of giving it a little bit of rest, of giving an opportunity for your conscious mind. The whole point is to, in a sense, turn off your conscious mind to rest up a little bit and to reset and to freshen up, and so that afterwards it can be re-engaged with the world, because that's its job. Its job is to engage with existence, engage with reality. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Let's see, Daniel.
So the Chinese government has an account on LinkedIn, and someone wrote, I don't think to them, but they answered this question that was asked somewhere: why shouldn't we, and I think by we they mean the West, make China a democracy so the Chinese people have the option to peacefully elect their government every few years? And the Chinese government points out that if you go to Taiwan, near Taipei Station, there are tramps, what we would call homeless, everywhere. And this is terrible. They say Chinese vagrants are very lucky. The local government will help them help the homeless after finding them. If they're disabled, they will send them back to their home countries. If they're disabled, they will find them a guardian to take care of them. If they're healthy, they will train them to find a new job. And at the end, they say the characteristic of a democratic country is that the government serves the people at the grassroots level. If your country serves the capitalists and the ruling class, then even if you have the right to vote, it is not a democratic country. What's your thoughts?
I mean, it's funny more than anything else. It's just funny. I've been to China. I've spent some time in China, both in the cities in Shanghai and Beijing, but also out in the countryside. And there are very, very, very poor people in China. I mean, much poorer than anything you see in the West. In some ways, much poorer than even, I think, some of the homeless in the United States are. So I don't think they have any one-up on us in terms of how the poor are treated in China or in the West. That's first. But second, you don't measure a system by how the weakest link within that system is treated. That is an altruistic, collectivistic, and ultimately egalitarian. It's a Rawlsian way of measuring the quality of a system. At the end of the day, one has to have a conception of what human life requires, what is required for successful human life, for human beings to achieve and thrive. When you actually look and we actually examine history and examine the world, one of the things that is required is freedom. And to the extent that people lack freedom, to the extent that other people are making decisions for them, to the extent that coercion can be applied to people at any point in time, whenever, to that extent, I think human well-being is at a deficit. Human well-being is being hurt. And to the extent people are left to make their own decisions based on their own values, and sometimes make mistakes and sometimes screw up, but have the opportunity to help each other or not. But live to that extent, I think people have the opportunity and do indeed flourish. And the consequence of that, I think, also related to wealth. That is, I also think those are kind of societies that are super wealthy. So I don't think voting necessarily is the most important feature of all that. So people in the West have turned democracy into a god, and it's easy to criticize democracy. I mean, democracy put Socrates to death. Democracy does a lot of bad things, but the West is not dominated by democracy, in spite of what the West says. The West has a certain type of democracy, a restrained democracy, a democracy that does not allow the majority to get away with anything. I don't think it's restrained enough. I don't think it's restrained in the right way, but the West has a certain restrained democracy.
And that's what really struck me about the question. If it had been asked in terms of install a government that protects the rights of individuals, it becomes a completely different question.
Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about individual rights. So then the question is, you have these democratic governments in the West that are not perfect, they're far from perfect. And you have a Chinese government that is far from perfect. Okay, my guess is the West is still better because we have more freedoms in the West, but it's just a marginal difference. It's not a huge difference. So, the West and China would like to present it as massive difference between the two systems, and it's not that big. So that's important. And of course, the ideal system is a system of individual rights, and an ideal system is one where individual rights are protected and where some things you vote on and most things you don't. There is no democracy in the common sense. So the whole way in which it's presented, the whole way it assumes a Rawlsian egalitarianism, and then assumes democracy is some kind of Western, and this is the West's fault because it glorifies democracy or makes democracy the aim. Whereas the aim should be liberty, the aim should be individual rights. And in that sense, the West is better than China. But China's not as bad as the Soviet Union was, not as bad as Iran is today, not as bad as North Korea, probably not as bad as Russia is today, because it's super, because there's some economic freedoms, there's some other freedoms that are still available or in China that are not in these other places. So. China's a difficult to analyze. Yeah, Andrew.
Do you observe any change in the way that the new right talks about democracy? I know the left has always been enthusiastic about democracy and referring to America as a democracy.
The new right doesn't really talk about democracy. What it refers to is liberal democracy, and that's the thing they hate. They hate liberal democracy, i.e. democracy that is based on an agenda of liberty. So they're using liberal in the classical liberal sense. What the new right wants is kind of a post-liberal order where there will be some role for democracy, and they do care about the will of the people. But to a large extent, from their perspective, that will of the people is channeled through the rulers, channeled through the people in charge who know best, who understand best.
Got it.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Let's see. Jonathan.
Hi. Oh, I'm here. Sorry, Yaron. Thank you so much. Two quick things. First of all, I wanted just to reiterate and appreciate something you said a number of months ago now about how disappointing it is, in effect, that today's conservative leaders never read or took Ayn Rand seriously. It's just such a cesspool there, complete absence of any type of ideas or thought, and the fact that they just have never. It's just so apparent that Rand is just not, Rand's ideas are not on their menu at all.
Yes, absolutely. And that's true, unfortunately, of conservatives, but it's also true in terms of taking her seriously of libertarians.
Here's my question, though. It's a little bit lighter. My theory is that, well, let me ask you this. Do you like surprise parties? My feeling is no one likes surprise parties. It's almost like a violation of your rights. It's deception. You are expecting a quiet night at home. You're dressed, maybe, relaxed, you're not up. And all of a sudden, this has been
People show up.
deceiving.
Yeah,
Say it
what the
again?
hell? What the
Yeah,
hell?
like you've
People
been
show
deceived.
up. What the hell?
And
Yeah.
now you've got to be entertaining. So I find it to be like, I don't know, violation of one's rights, but it's deception. And what do you think about surprise parties? Does anyone really like them?
I don't think so. I don't like them, but then nobody's ever given me a surprise party. So who knows? Maybe I would like them if they give it to me. I don't think so. I like to have at least some prep in terms of whatever I'm going to do. I like to be get myself in the right mood, the right context, and I think that applies to parties like everything else. So I don't like people just knocking on my door and just showing up, which is, one reason I left Israel, because they tend to do that. I don't think I like surprise parties. Mild surprises where you're expecting like presents that you don't know what they are, that's fine, because there's a present coming, you just don't know what it is. If it doesn't involve too much energy and too much changes, then yeah. So I agree with you. I don't think anybody, very few people like surprise parties. I think
Quick follow-up. If
Yeah.
you were invited to go to someone's surprise party to be a guest, would you not go because you wouldn't want to make that person, you wouldn't want to be a part of that?
I'd ask the person who was organizing it whether they thought the person would enjoy it, because I can't rule out the idea that somebody might like surprise parties, and so I would ask the person who knew maybe this person better whether they thought this was okay.
Thank you for the response.
I wouldn't just assume that.
Thanks again.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, friend Harper.
Hey, just real quick on what you and Jonathan were just talking about, because I put a lot of brain power into friendship stuff, is that I think it's healthy to try to observe your friends to see if they would appreciate it or not before you decide to try it.
Definitely. Or ask them.
Yep. And then also I wanted to shout out you too, because I'm listening to Jonathan Honing audiobook version of Guidebook to Americanism, or
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yaron is actually obviously featured in there, obviously Miss Rand as well. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's an excellent book and very much needed these days.
Thank you
8
both.
hours of Jonathan Honan talking to me. Oh yeah. No. But so
That's the kind of books you get from from the Yaron Brook show.
oh yeah. All right, so on to my question thing. So last time I was on here, I asked about friendship as a central purpose. We brought up try to monetize it, make a living off it a little bit. And so I started putting down notes for like an outline, expanding on a book kind of stuff. And I wanted to bounce a little bit of it off you to get some thoughts, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
All right, so I have 3 foundational principles for building healthy friendships. So these are before friendship comes up, how to set yourself up for success in the friendship game. So the first one is independence, and I kind of have these. I'm trying to formulate the book for general audience, but so I kind of have a caveat of like, I'm an objectivist, but here's what I think these terms mean in the context of friendship. So independence being self-reliance and not needing your friends to support you and sustain you. And then I put a little caveat for like the emergency clause, because that can happen. Individualism is everyone represents themselves, and basically how you hold accountability. And then I have boundaries, which is the limits of your voluntary action. And then I also put it's healthy to talk about these things explicitly with people. And that's it. Just wondering if you had any
Say that
thoughts
again.
or any input on that.
What was the second one? Independence.
Individualism. So everyone represents themselves, and it's kind of where you would think about accountability.
Yep.
And then boundaries, which would be like limits of voluntary action.
So you don't think boundaries falls under independence?
Um,
You don't think it's an aspect of independence?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. In that,
I mean, you want to have something. So think about that. But you want to have something, something on the trader principles. So you want to have something on the kind of value for value win-win nature of any friendship relationship and what that means. So you want to come at friendship from the perspective of a trader, not from a perspective of a taker or for just a giver, which some people do, but from a real perspective of spiritual trade, visibility. And if it's going to be psychological visibility, then it has to be mutual psychological visibility. So so that to me is essential for friendship, is this idea of I'm getting something from you that is really valuable, and we're only going to be friends if you're going to get something from me as well, right?
Yeah, awesome. That's a lot to work with. I like the mutual visibility part. I didn't really think of that explicitly. Alrighty. Well, thank you
And
kindly.
I think boundaries would be part of individualism and independence. It's just an aspect of the two. I mean, an individual, somebody who's independent doesn't cross bound, or an individualist wouldn't cross those boundaries and would expect his friends not to cross the boundaries with him, right?
It kind of, when you put it like that, it kind of reminds me of the existence, consciousness, identity axiom. But or the relationship between those ones. But yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Good. Excellent. Thanks, friend Hopper. Let's see, who do I miss? Andrew.
Hello.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi. The way you describe Israel, Yaron, I think Larry David should do another season of Curb Your Enthusiasm in Israel. Sounds like there'd be a whole
It's too easy.
Whole new set of cultural norms to go after.
Humor in Israel is a big deal. Israeli comedians are some of the best in the world. Israeli skit comedy, the Saturday night version of comedy in Israel is off the charts good. They make fun of politicians. Our politicians in the U.S. wouldn't know what to do with themselves. They would go bury themselves somewhere if anybody did make fun of them. Nobody makes fun of politicians like they do in Israel. In Israel, they go after everybody, and they go after religion. They go after the ultra-Orthodox Jews made fun of almost every night. I mean, every show on these skit shows. I mean, if you went after Christians like that on a national broadcast TV show, they would freak out. There'd be a revolution in this country. I'm telling you that, Jews in Israel are very, very good at making fun of stuff that deserves to make fun. You should have seen the COVID humor that they had. It was terrific. During lockdowns, this one comedian used to do a daily skit from his bathtub, because that was his office, because he couldn't leave the home. And and he would go over the new regulations as they came out. And he would do this long thing of the regulations. Can't leave your house unless this happens. And if you leave the house, then you can go this far, but unless this other thing happens, and then you can go over there. And you can't get it. You can get a vaccine if you're this age, unless you have this condition, and then he would do this, but he would do this regularly, kind of an update on what's going on in COVID, making fun of everything. You have no clue if left or right. He was making fun of everybody, every attitude. It was, I mean, to this day, my wife watches this stuff from Israel. That's how I know the news from Israel. It's from these comedians. So, don't count on me being too objective about. No, but it's we watch a lot of that, and it's super funny. And it was funny when I was a kid. There was always this strong human, a strong sense of making fun of kind of these cultural attitudes in Israel. And I'm sure there'd been skits about the relatives who just show up. Sure. Because it happens all the time. Not just relatives,
Well, let me.
distant relatives, you know.
What
People
about
who might have lived in the same
relatives and
village 3
neighbors?
generations ago, in the same
Right.
shtetl 3
Right.
generations.
That's funny. Well, then let me ask an Israel-oriented question, because you did answer this, but maybe to expound on it. I heard Netanyahu talking about the legislation that will curb the judiciary in Israel, and he was speaking in very pro-free market terms.
Yeah.
Oh, he was talking to Larry Kudlow in the interview.
Oh,
that
so he was
heard.
on an American show. He was speaking English, and he was talking to Larry Kudlow, who's a very pro-free market guy, relatively.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're not buying it
Oh no, of course not.
as free market.
I don't buy anything Netanyahu says in English. As a principle, he everything he says in English is generally a lie, put on to convince his audience in the United States. He might even believe what he says in English, but he never does what he says in English. Right? He never does it. Look, the Israeli judiciary.
His whole fear was about how the judiciary is holding back the economy and the regulations
The
are out
only
of
thing
control.
holding back the economy is Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been holding back the economy for over 10 years now. He has not, when he was finance minister, he was actually really good. And for some reason, the judiciary didn't block all his reforms when he was finance minister. They all went through. But since he's become prime minister, there have been no free market reforms in Israel. There were plenty as finance minister, zero as a prime minister. And that's all because the economy is just one more lever that he uses for power. And he cares nothing for it. Now, given that, judiciary needs to be reformed in Israel. There are real problems with the judiciary in Israel. It is a self-perpetuating leftist machine. And then the question is, how do you reform the judiciary? And Israel needs that reform. But Netanyahu's not going to be the guy to do it well. And he's not the guy who's going to do it in a way that the Israeli public believes, because remember, it's very, very important that people believe that you have the rule of law in your country. So if you're going to have judicial reform, you have to sell it, and you have to make it, you have to provide people with confidence that there's some objectivity around it. Very difficult to do when Israel doesn't have a constitution to have judicial reform that's good. You could have election for judges, which is kind of the American system, but that has its own corruption involved in it. Judges could be appointed by politicians, but how, it's a tricky proposition, which I don't think, because of where Netanyahu is and because of the kind of coalition he has formed, I don't think he is in a position to do it, and what he does will be any good. Remember that the main thing that they want to change the judiciary for is not economic reform. The main thing they want to change the judiciary for is, I believe, to give them more power to violate the property rights of Arabs in Israel and of Arabs in the West Bank. If you look at his coalition is not about property rights. It's not about free markets. It's about Jewish supremacy. It's about nationalism. It's about doing whatever they can to suppress and oppress the Arab population. Now, certain things need to be done because there's terrorism and there's violence and so on. But I don't think they care one iota, or most of them don't care one iota about economic liberty. That's not what's driving this. I mean, Netanyahu, again, gives a good talk, but
I would have never realized that if you didn't explain it, because he makes it sound so convincing.
He is so smart.
And he even knows how to. He knows how to play to one of his points in the interview was about how it's about separation of powers and the judiciary and the legislative and the executive branch and arrogating the proper powers to the proper branch. You know, he knows how to even go after foundational American ideals.
Knows how to appeal to Americans. He has mastered that skill for 30 years. He was the ambassador to the United States at the UN. But anyway, he mastered that skill. He's a very smart guy. He went to MIT, but he is not a champion of liberty, a champion of freedom, or a champion of free markets at all. Never. I mean, he was, but he's not anymore, and not in his role as prime minister. He is a power-lusting narcissist who will hold on to power at all cost, and will cut deals and cut coalitions with anybody who will give him the ability to be in power. And you know, he comes from an amazing family. I like his brothers. I know one of his brothers who's a playwright, who's a really nice guy. I know his nephew. His nephew actually, Netanyahu's nephew actually is the guy who often videotapes my talks in Israel. So he's, you know, the whole family are Ayn Rand fans, including Netanyahu. But the real hero of the family was his brother Yoni, who died in Entebbe. The only Israeli casualty in Entebbe was the commanding officer of the Entebbe raid, which was Yoni Netanyahu. It was Bibi's brother. Yoni was the guy who got the brothers to read Atlas Shrugged. Yoni was the, you know, by most accounts that I've seen, the best of them, the most principled of them. Bibi was in, I think, at MIT when the Entebbe raid happened. So, but Yoni was the command of Israeli special forces, and was on the ground as the command of special forces on the ground in Uganda for the raid, and took a sniper bullet. You learn all kinds of cool history facts on the Yaron Brook Show. All right, let's see. We'll go to the super chat. We'll do the $320 questions, and then we'll go back to our panel. Marilyn says, what do you think of Israeli Netflix series Fauda? I'm hooked, but I can't watch it at bedtime. I talked about Fauda many, many times on the Yaron Brook Show, Marilyn. I love the show. It is completely addictive. It is the kind of show you have to binge watch. You know, what makes it addictive is that it is super dramatic. It just ramps up the drama, and the twists and the turns are always, the drama is always at 11, right, out of 10. And so it's always a cliffhanger. You always want to watch the next episode. They're not very long. They're less than an hour, sometimes like 40 minutes. And it's easy to watch them in a row, but it's very, very, very well done. Now, often, like in the last season, there are big plot holes, and if you understand a little bit of the geography of the area and stuff, like particularly in the last season, none of it makes any sense. I mean, it's just, some of it is just stupid, but it doesn't matter because it's about the action and about the drama and about the people, and you learn to care about the people. It's very, very good at characterization, at characters, at building characters, at you caring about the characters, and then elevating the drama. So, you know, the Israeli head guy is always falling in love with some Arab woman, right? He's always falling for them. So in the first season, it was the first or second season was a Palestinian doctor. In the fourth season, it is an Israeli Arab policewoman. But and that, of course, makes the drama all the more intense because it makes it personal. So it's very effective. The relationship between the team and their superiors, it's very, very well done. It's very well written. Again, the plot's a little far-fetched, again, particularly in this last season. But it's action, it's nonstop, and you care. Whereas most action that I watch, I don't care. They could all blow up. The good guys could blow up. The bad guys could blow up. Who cares if they all die? It would make no difference. But here, you actually care about them. And it's also pretty good about showing, and this is a more naturalistic element of it, it is good at showing you the cost of living a double life. And I think it's a real cost. You see that also in that Netflix show called The Spy about Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy. There's a massive cost about living a dual life, about, in a sense, lying to people for a living, and placing your life at risk constantly, and placing the love of the people you care about at risk constantly. There's a real cost for being a warrior like that, and or the particular kind of warrior. And the show is very good at showing you that cost, and that they're heroes in spite of that, right? They don't let it destroy them completely. And that's the romantic element on top of kind of the more naturalistic side of it. Thank you, Marilyn, and I'm glad you enjoy it. And yeah, all 4 seasons are worth watching for those of you who haven't watched it yet. It's on Netflix. Harper Campbell, we generally associate nihilism as being a left-wing phenomena, but I've encountered a ton of young fascist nihilist types in right-wing circles. Are they just copying the left, or were they always there? I mean, look, they're always there. There's definitely a nihilism of the right. I suggested, I think when Trump was president, part of the problem was that he had a real strong nihilistic streak to him, and certainly he kind of reinforced the nihilism in a lot of young people. But the new racists, the white nationalists, there's a strong nihilistic element there. There's a strong element. This is not motivated from love. This is motivated from hate. This is not motivated from a true belief in some amazing white people. This is just hatred, right? This is just hatred of the other, and they're willing to be poorer. They're willing to be poorer, but surrounded by people the same skin color, which again is a destructive kind of nihilistic sense. So it's fear and hatred, but there is, I think, it also attracts certain nihilists. They just want to watch it burn. There's some people, and I'd say this whole attitude around the left, the whole attitude that says, as long as it's bad for the left, we're for it. There's a fundamental nihilism there. Because even if it's destructive to yourself, as long as the left suffers more, it's okay. The whole country will burn down. As long as the left is destroyed, it's okay. We'll have authoritarians on the right take over America. As long as the left's destroyed, it's okay, right? That attitude has elements of real, wanting to see destruction for the sake of destruction. It's nihilism is a consequence of a lack of rational ideals, and it's not surprising that as the culture is more and more removed from the founding principles, more and more removed from the Enlightenment principles, it becomes more and more nihilistic, both on left and right. It abandons the sources of rational values. Okay, James, is narcissism just a childhood coping mechanism run amok? Narcissism appears to be a powerful motivator for trying to achieve success and status. Would you say many successful CEOs are narcissistic to some degree? No, I mean, no. I don't think narcissism exists in childhood. I don't think children are narcissistic at all. I mean, how do you separate the idea of I think children are self-interested. I think children are self-focused, self-motivated. But narcissism is a view that the world revolves around you, but more importantly, it's the view that your worth, your self-esteem, your value, what and who you are comes from the judgment of other people. It's an essential characteristic of people with low self-esteem. And while certain CEOs have this, I think the most successful do not. Because I think you have to have immense self-esteem to really be successful, particularly over long periods of time and in complex, diverse industries. And I think that narcissism is something that only in certain types of industries could work. Industries where a lot of it involves sales and marketing versus actually building sophisticated, complex things. So I think narcissism, I don't think a lot of CEOs, and I certainly don't think children are narcissists. I certainly don't think that is the case. All right, let's go back to our panel, and you're in a different order now, so on my screen. So we'll start with Daniel.
The fact sheet on Biden's tax on billionaires contains this little gem, or at least what I think is a gem. Quote, President Biden is a capitalist and believes anyone should be able to become a millionaire or a billionaire. He also believes that it is wrong for America to have a tax code that results in America's wealthiest households paying a lower rate tax than working families, end quote. I mean, you know, the first obvious thing is, why should it be a rate? Like if you go to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread, should the price be based on a percentage of your income? The other thing is, he doesn't talk at all about government spending, and he doesn't talk about individual rights. I mean, is this a guy on the street, or is this the president of the United States? What's going on here?
Well, nobody talks about individual. I mean, there's a sense in which it's not fair to single out Biden, right?
No.
Not a single politician up there talks about individual rights. Never
Agreed.
Does.
Agreed.
Did Trump ever talk about it? Bush or Obama?
Never.
There's no such thing as individual rights in their minds. They can't hold it. It doesn't integrate. So there's no conception of that. It is true that Biden realizes Biden is turning out to be, I think, a moderately smarter politician than I thought he was. And he realizes that the agenda of Bernie Sanders and the agenda of AOC and the agenda of the Antifa and the violent, egalitarian, nihilistic left is not an agenda that can win you elections. And so he has committed himself to appealing where he can to what he thinks American people actually think. And the American people generally still believe that you should be able to become rich. You should be able to, if you work hard and are successful, that's a good thing. And he appeals to that. And capitalism is still viewed positively by Americans, certainly more than it.
You froze on us.
Including, by the way, Elizabeth Warren, which is the most stunning of all of them, right? Elizabeth Warren, who is an out-and-out fascist, is often says, "I'm a capitalist. I'm a capitalist." Right? So he's playing to his audience. I also think, to the extent he kind of believes that, inside whatever there is that goes for a brain that Biden has. There's some kind of mushy conception of capitalism is where people, get to spend their money at the mall and whatever they want. We don't tell them. And generally, we don't tell stores what they can and cannot store up to a point. And people can make more money than other people. And there's no definition. They couldn't come up with one. There's no conception of it. And then there is this other idea, which Obama was very good at. I mean, Obama was a real intellectual as compared to any president, really, maybe in a very long time. And Obama's, I think, his most important speech, and the one that was the most evil, but the most important, was the "You didn't build that" speech, where he basically said, look, yes, you people should be able to become billionaires and millionaires, but you have to realize that you didn't build that. And that if you didn't build that, then other people did. And we as a society did. We made it possible. We made it possible for you to be successful. And because of that, you owe something back. And because of that, that's the claim we have against you in terms of higher rates for you versus everybody else. Without the roads, without the this, without the that, all the bullshit that he said, right? Some of it was just ridiculous. But without government funding of science, they go, this is the most sophisticated ones. There is no technology. The whole technology industry is built in government-funded science. Are they completely wrong? No. Can they imagine an alternative way government doesn't fund science like we can? No. So, but if you draw a line, yes, government science did fund many of the inventions that created this. Therefore, what? Therefore, in their mind, in their ridiculous rationalization, these billionaires owe money back. So, they create these rationalizations. And for 99% of the people out there, it all kind of makes sense. I mean, if you listen to critiques of Biden's speech from Republicans, there's no fundamental, there's no principled objection. It's just, ridiculous stuff. He lied, he did this, he did that. Well, yeah, they all lie. Who doesn't lie in politics? But is there fundamental individual rights-based critique of Biden's speech? No.
And even on the spending side, everyone agrees that spending is too much, but no one's going to do anything about it. And back when there was a Tea Party, they said, hey, let's cut whatever it was, 200 billion. And people were like, oh my God, they're going to be, dying babies in the street if we cut 200 billion out of the $2 trillion increase we just had.
Yeah, this was my point the other day about how I thought Biden actually caught the Republicans and one-upped them. Because he basically said, Republicans want to cut your Medicaid and Social Security. And instead of Republicans saying, yeah, we need to reform entitlements. This is essential, at least reform them, if not do away with them. Instead of saying that, they said, no, we don't want to cut anything. And he said, oh, so you don't want to cut them. Okay, so I commit, we're not going to cut. And the Republicans stood up and gave him a standing ovation. I mean, it's unbelievable, the state of the Republican Party today. And this is the opposition party. So I agree with you completely. Nobody is serious about spending. The Democrats have modern monetary theory as a theory why they should not cut spending. Republicans just want to cut spending when Democrats are in power, and they don't want to cut spending when they're in power. And that was, we see it, right? They negotiated a pretty good deal with Obama to kind of at least cap spending. And for 6 years, government didn't grow as a percent of GDP because of that. As soon as they got the House, the Senate, and the presidency, spending took off. The cap was gone. Spending took off. And as soon as Biden now wants to raise the debt limit, which every president has done from the beginning of time, right? Republicans say, no, we want to cut spending. They discover that they want to cut spending again. It's all politics. It has nothing to do with any kind of absolute principle or beliefs or wanting a free market or anything like that.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, Stephen.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephen. Let's see, Andrew.
So, how do we argue against what I would say is like an argument from moderation or compromise, in the sense of, for example, in the context of socialized medicine, I don't think it is effective to argue like, well, everything other than a capitalist, laissez-faire capitalist system is a hellhole. It just doesn't match people's experiences, and so it lacks credibility. And we can point to concrete negative effects of socialized systems that are like quasi-socialized. Yep. But it also doesn't feel like it has any oomph to it. Like I want to argue with a real clear laissez-faire kind of argument, but that does scare people because it's strong and they would prefer to stay in the middle and moderate and say, well, we like you mentioned about Elizabeth Warren labeling herself a capitalist. They want to be capitalists, but with the guardrails, so on and so forth. That really means kind of a quasi-socialist system. How do we argue? How do we frame it so that we're arguing it correctly?
I think we have to frame it in terms of principles. We have to frame it in terms of individual rights. We have to frame it in terms of human flourishing and individual happiness and what's required. If you start getting into political debates, then why not a little bit of safeguard? Why not a little bit? So people are taxed. So what? A little bit of money is taken from them. But, you have to be able to make the case that there's a principle here. And once you violate a principle, you've done something deeply immoral and unjust. And once you've done that, then it's also, I'm a big believer in slippery slopes. I know people don't like slippery slopes, but slippery slopes exist. If you start with a tax rate of 7%, as we did when the first income tax was passed, where 95% of Americans, I think, didn't even pay anything. Just 5% paid. The highest rate was 7%. Within 4 years, 5 years, pretty much all Americans were paying income tax, and the top marginal tax rate was well over 50%. That's the way it does. Once you violate a principle, there's no end to it. Then there's, let's have a little bit of a safeguard. But what about those people who are not in the safeguard and they're kind of on the edge? Well, let's expand it a little bit. And what about those people who now are on the edge and not in the safeguard? Well, let's expand it a little bit, and there's no end to it. And that's how you get the kind of monstrosity that is the U.S. welfare state today, which is the worst. In many respects, the American welfare state is worse than European welfare states, because Europeans went all in from the beginning. They said, okay, we're gonna subsidize all of this. And it was a package, and it was neatly framed, and it was all done once, and a bureaucracy set up to do this. And in America, we don't want to do all that. So we said, let's subsidize a little bit here. Oh, but what about these people? Okay, we'll give them this other special benefit. Oh, but what about that? We'll give them another special benefit. And each special benefit has its own bureaucracy. Each special benefit has its own mechanism, and it just grows, and it grows out of control. So the European welfare state is far more efficient than our welfare state, partially because ours is piecemeal. And the piecemeal comes from the fact that there's something in the Americans who resist the welfare state to begin with. So we're trying to sneak it up on them. We're trying to go down the slippery slope, whereas the Europeans just embraced it and just did it. And in a sense, that's more efficient economically to do it that way. It's why our healthcare system is so expensive, right? Because we don't want socialized medicine. We want a little bit of socialized medicine, and maybe a little bit more, maybe just for old people and poor people and uninsured people, and maybe we can think of it a few other people. And so we get this weird, completely irrational and difficult to maneuver hybrid system that just doesn't make any sense. At least Europeans, it's simple, it's straightforward. You know exactly what the cost is. You know, people die, and it's not as good as the system most Americans have, but that's okay, because it's at least knowable and doable and within its scope. You have to reject it all or not at all.
And speak in terms of principles.
Yes, always principles. Yes.
Got it.
All right. Friend Harper.
Hey, so this one's going to be another friendship flavored question, or another pick your brain about it. So I read in a comic book once a formulation that kind of describes the difference between friendship and romance. And I thought, so it's in like a flowery type of way of explaining it. And I was trying to figure out how to talk about it explicitly, but the quote was something like, a friend or friendship and romance have in common the feeling of desiring closeness with that person. But the difference is friendship is about grounding them, and romance is about sweeping them off their feet. And I was trying to figure out how to formulate that without it, like, basically describing what that kind of means. I was wondering if you had any thoughts.
I think it's too, the description is too grounded in emotion. And so it's too subjective. It doesn't ground it in values. You have to ground friendship in values, and then love is a different category of values. It's a different type of values, a different level of values. And you have to ground it in psychological visibility, and you have to ground it in the relationship. Thanks, Steve. See you. And you can't just ground it in the emotional level. Sweep somebody off their feet is not a what does that actually mean? So it's descriptive. It's nice. It's an emotional descriptive. But if you're actually thinking about friendship and thinking about love, you have to be able to put it in terms that are value oriented and in terms that are reason based, not primarily emotional.
Yeah, that's I was just saying that that quote.
Emotion.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that quote always resonated with me, but I was trying to figure out kind of like why, because
I think there's a lot of truth to it, right?
Yeah, because the way I kind of think about being a good friend is being part of it's being somebody who does not cause people anxiety, which involves communicating clearly and explicitly talking about certain things. And I think that can help ground somebody in that, like, you can make them less anxious or help ground their feelings to reality. But romance is kind of foreign to me because I haven't gotten to it till I was like 30, basically. But and I don't really understand what sweeps people off their feet, even though that's a thing like a bromide I've heard before.
Well, and it's true. I mean, romance is about intense emotion, and that's what sweeping off the feet means.
Oh, okay.
It's like a high degree, high intensity of emotions.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Well, anyway. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Adam.
Okay, my second question has to do with the median equivalent adult income as calculated by OECD.
Yep.
Now, I've had a big problem with estimating how wealthy a country is by just dividing the gross domestic product by the population or the number of households.
Sure.
Because first of all, you can only spend the part of the GDP that comes to you if the government doesn't take it first. So you should subtract government spending from the gross domestic product. Now, they don't actually subtract the entire government spending, but they do subtract taxes and all compulsory payments, which is definitely most of it. Also, all the other government interferences in the market, such as tariffs, corruption, regulations, are reflected in the cost of living. And they do put the cost of living in the denominator.
Yep.
Now, I think PPP is not the best way to calculate the cost of living. I think the CIA World Handbook methodology for cost of living is much sounder, but at least they come close to doing it the right way. And it's very interesting to look at the results and realize that, for example, China, despite its enormous progress, is still among the OECD members, because unfortunately it's only a quarter of the world, the second poorest after India.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely right. All of that. So Adam is looking at a Wikipedia page, which is under median income, and it's got an interesting graph there. It's got an interesting chart there. And what you see, I mean, some of the interesting things that come out of this is that the United States has a very high median income, much higher than most European countries. If you're interested, the UK, so the United States median income is $46,625. This is purchase parity, power parity adjusted. The UK is in this thing is 25,500. So the Brits are significantly poorer than Americans. Where's Japan on this list? Somebody was just asking. Somebody said something about Japan.
Yes, Japan is in 24th place.
21,697. So Japanese are 50% poorer than Americans, and this is a fact. If you can see this in going to Japanese homes, how small they are, and in other things that Japanese consumption in Japan is a lot poorer. They are a lot poorer. Now they do have sushi that raises the standard of living and quality of life dramatically, but good sushi, not just any sushi. But in terms of actual income, they are quite poor. And if you look down at the bottom, there's China and India. India, half of China, but Russia is 16,163. That's a third of, basically a third of what the United States is. They are, 2/3 poorer. It's actually a really interesting chart when you look at Germany. that's quite a bit poorer than the US, Sweden that everybody admires so much. I mean, the only countries that are close to the US are Luxembourg and Norway. And Luxembourg is just a tiny little country that everybody does their banking there because they have banking privacy laws. And Norway has oil, which basically is a way in which everything is subsidized over there. But Canada is the first country. Canada and Switzerland are the first real countries, if you will, that even approach the US, and the US is significantly richer. And if you add to that fact, in spite of us coming down in the US and criticizing the US, and the US is still, from a financial perspective, in terms of what you can do with those dollars, the richest country in the world, the richest big country in the world. Sure, Dubai might be richer, but I don't count that as a country.
One comment, which is that Japan has a government planning model for the finance industry and to some extent for the whole economy, whereas South Korea, which used to be part of a Japanese colony, is now way ahead of them.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the Koreans have gone past the Japanese because they have now Korea also has problems, and they also have too much central planning. But Korea has, standard of living in Korea is significantly now higher than in Japan, which is, it's by 50% higher. One's 21,000 and one's 31,000. That's a huge difference. South Korea is quite a wealthy society, and that's amazing. Given at the end of the Korean War, South Korea was poorer than North Korea. I'll talk more about what South Korea did right in order to get rich at some point, and I can also talk about what Japan did wrong to kind of stumble. But Japan was on the right track in the 1980s, and then since the 1980s, basically has seen almost no income growth in Japan. All right, thank you, Adam.
Okay, one more question, but I guess we're going to take turns.
Yeah, if we'll get to another round. If not, then next time. Let's see, Richard.
Yeah, I was actually kind of dovetailing with the Korea discussion. I've been thinking a lot about the Korean War and sort of the early Cold War and reading a lot about it. And Truman's thinking and what he actually wrote in his diaries, first of all, he's so petty. And a lot of the decisions he makes with the peace treaty with Japan are just, oh, I don't want MacArthur to be finished as Governor General of Japan, so I'm going to delay signing a peace treaty until after he can't run for president against me. But there's so much bound up in this idea of let's build up, let's put our troops all over the place, all because we're afraid of the Soviets, but we don't want to fight them directly even before they have a lot of nukes. So do you think the whole strategy of that setup was the fundamental problem, rather than just fighting them, spend a lot of money all at once, but then it's over? Or
I mean, that's what General Patton wanted to do, and Churchill probably wanted to do it, but Patton. I mean, the reason Patton was dismissed from his role as basically head of the U.S. command in Berlin right at the end of World War II was Patton was going to start a war with the Russians. I mean, he was egging for it. He was nudging them. He was doing whatever he could to create an excuse to go to Moscow. He was ready and eager, and they had to fire him. They really and he tragically he was killed in a traffic accident on his way home, in a sense. Killed. There are some conspiracy theories about the fact that maybe he wasn't killed, the fact that maybe he was murdered, but who knows? Yes, I mean, if we're going to go to war with Russia, 45 is the time to do it. We've got the troops in Europe. We've got the industrial base in the United States. If we're going to engage in warfare with the communists, then we could have done it on our own terms, crushed them in 45, replaced whatever regime they would have had in Russia, or at least at least not given them Eastern Europe. What I don't know, a moral travesty it was that they gave them Eastern Europe. I mean, I think I've told this story before, but Patton arrives on the border of the Czech Republic of Czechoslovakia, and he wires Eisenhower, and he says, I can be in Prague in a day, and doesn't hear anything. And he wires him again, I can be in, and Bradley, because Eisenhower was too political to actually reply, right? Because Eisenhower wanted to run for president. Eisenhower was awful, horrible character, right? And so Eisenhower, so Bradley, who's Eisenhower's number 2, answers and says, no, we've promised it to the Soviets. So basically they handed on a silver platter. Patton could have taken Eastern Europe. Even, and not to mention that if Patton had headed the invasion of Europe, at least according to Victor Davis Hanson, who and others who I've read, the war would have been over in 9 months earlier. You would have saved many people in the concentration camps, but also you would have had a straight shot for Eastern Europe. There would have been, Germany would have been one country. You would have probably gone into Poland. You'd have taken most of that. But the whole invasion of Europe, the whole D-Day was a political exercise. And Patton was out because he had slapped a soldier. They also gave priority to, what's his name, the British general who got bogged down in the north, and they had to reroute troops and energy and oil to help him out at the expense of Patton's forces. It was politics. And it's the beginning of the complete, well, not the beginning, but the complete politicization of war, which I think has destroyed the American military.
Brad,
And just, I was just going to ask as a quick follow-up, do you think it would have been legitimate if we say for self-interest reasons, we just don't want to sacrifice that many American lives to take on the Soviets, they'll collapse on their own, whatever the case might be.
Absolutely, but then don't go to war with
But
them,
if we,
right? Then no Korea,
Right.
no Vietnam, no troops everywhere around the world. Basically say the communists will do what the communists do. If they want to take Europe, they'll take Europe. We're not intervening. So you can't have it both ways. You either take them on, and if you take them on, you take them on in 45 and you crush them, or you don't take them on, but then you don't sacrifice American troops in Korea and Vietnam for what? For nothing.
what about paying our allies, basically? Here's some money, here's some surplus weapons and ammunition and stuff if you want to fight them, like China.
No, but our allies
Shanghai
didn't
Shek,
want
here
to
you go.
fight. Didn't want to fight and didn't have the capabilities of doing it. Who wanted to fight? Nobody fought. I mean, it's fine sending weapons to Vietnamese and sending weapons to Koreans, but they would have lost, and they did lose, right?
Or just defend themselves, like, so, hey, if the Soviets send...
Sure, we could have promoted that,
Okay.
but it's not clear that would have saved them. If China enters the war, South Korea is toast, and we know that South Vietnam was toast no matter what. So just get out. If you've decided not to engage with the Soviets, don't engage with the Soviets. Daniel, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just saying it was Bradley, who was the British general, I think, that you were trying to
No,
think.
not Bradley. Bradley was an American general, Eisenhower's number 2. It's Montgomery.
Montgomery.
And they Montgomery, who had done very well in Africa, but got bogged down in Northern Europe. But because he was a Brit and because this had to be a coalition thing, it's the same reason why the Allies didn't enter Paris. They waited around until a French general arrived with a few symbolic French troops, and they entered Paris. Paris wasn't liberated by the Americans. Why not? I mean, speed is of the essence here. Speed is what matters, and yet I don't know if it was de Gaulle who entered Paris. Maybe it was de Gaulle, but it was all the World War II. Sadly, the way FDR fought it and the way Truman then fought it was, and Eisenhower, of course, and the reason Eisenhower was made, to lead Europe was all politics. It was all politics. And then you're right. Truman did not want MacArthur to run for president, so he held him on in Japan. And then when he got bogged down in Korea, he didn't give him what he needed in order to win. He didn't give approval to use nuclear weapons. He wanted him to be perceived weak. He wanted him to be basically to not run for president. Of course, he didn't. He landed up not running for president. He still lost to Eisenhower, didn't he? Right. I think Eisenhower still won.
He never formally ran either time. He was just trying to win on write-ins, which not a good strategy, but.
Okay, Jonathan.
Hey, Yaron, you've often talked about the kind of dramatic effects of compounding and how like an extra 1% over time makes a huge difference. And I wonder, my sense is it's the same thing, the flip side in the destructive sense when it comes to inflation. Like, even now they're saying, well, it's come down from 7 to 6%, but is it the same type of compound destruction in terms of prolonged deflation when you've got 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, that destruction is compounding just like on the upside as well?
Yes and no. So no, in the sense that, look, if everything was getting more expensive, but your wages stayed the same, then obviously it would be unbelievably destructive and it would be exponentially destructive and you would be wiped out. But the reality is that our wages keep up with inflation for the most part, and the economy keeps up with inflation for the most part. So here's the ways in which inflation is really, really destructive. It's destructive in terms of redistribution of wealth. Some people benefit from inflation and some people lose from inflation, and that has nothing to do with their productivity or their value added to the economy. It has everything to do with whether they hold debt or whether they're creditors or debtors, and whether their debt is denominated in fixed interest rates or variable interest rates. So that's one way in which it redistributes wealth. And the other, even worse aspect of it is it distorts investment decisions. It makes it very, very difficult to decide on investments in the future, primarily investments, both financial investments and productive investments. But this is the problem, that destructive part of it is not the result of CPI inflation. That destructive part of it is because of money inflation. That is the role of the Federal Reserve in printing money and distributing it in the way it does, and basically influencing and manipulating interest rates. So the distortion in production was going on in the United States during 0% interest, right? The era where inflation was very low and we had 0% interest. And it was also it's also going on right now with inflation very high. So the real destructive part of inflation is the government manipulating money and interest rates. And the fact that prices are going up is bad, and it hurts people because their wages don't quite keep up, or they don't keep up in the short run, or in the long run, they tend to partially at least catch up. But, so it's the existence of the central bank is the problem, even more than the inflation that it brings about. People say like the dollar, is being eroded by 99% since 1913 or whatever, right? So a dollar back then is worth 10 cents today. I mean, that's true, but it's also true that your wages are much, much higher today because of inflation than they would be otherwise, right? The nominal wages, not the real wages, your nominal wages are much higher. So you have to correct for both nominal and if for real, you have to think in terms of real prices, not nominal prices. And that's why inflation is so insidious, because it hurts you no matter what, because the central bank exists. And it hurts you in ways you can't really see. The advantage of prices going up, the advantage of CPI inflation is everybody sees it, everybody knows it's bad, and they want to fight it. The evil of 0% inflation, which we had for 10 years, is that nobody sees it, and yet nobody sees the damaging effect, but it has horrible damaging effects out there. Does that make sense, Jonathan?
Absolutely. Thanks for that answer and for the show and all you're doing these days. Great, great content and great work.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. I think that's everybody. Round two. Okay, let's do some super chats. Ori says, have you seen people go through major transformations later in life, late 20s, early 30s, i.e. develop strong purpose, self-esteem, improved sense of life? It's pretty funny. You know, to him, late in life is 20s or early 30s. God, what does that make me? Late in life. That's pretty bad. Yes, absolutely. People go through major transformations in their 20s and 30s all the time. I would even argue some people go through major transformations even later in life than that. But I think in the 20s and 30s, there's still enough of flexibility. You're still not as committed. Things have not calcified quite as much. And there's plenty of opportunities to go through complete and very, very deep and very, very thorough transformations. Again, I know people who that happens to them in their 40s and 50s as well. So the later it is, the harder it is. No question about that. The less plasticity there is, if you will, in your value hierarchy, the less plasticity there is in your just the connections in your brain, the less plasticity there is in your psychology. Your psychology is set. So the earlier, the better, but it is possible. It is possible, I think, later as well. Ashton, thank you. Ashton, $100. Really appreciate it. Claims that cannot be tested, assertions immune to disproof, veridically worthless. Whatever value they may have in inspiring us or exciting our sense of wonder. Yes, I mean, there's some caveats to this, but that's a quote from Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was amazing. When I watched, what was that show in the 1980s, Cosmos? It was so inspiring. It was so beautifully done. He had such a wonderful voice and he had such a wonderful sense of life, I think. He was wrong on climate change, environmentalism, and so on. But the essential approach, the wonder he expressed for science and engineering and progress and achievement was just amazing. And I learned a lot. I remember watching it, the whole series in Israel in the mid-1980s. And I'm a big admirer of that series and of Carl Sagan's work on it. Yes, I mean, basically what he's saying is a epistemological principle that the arbitrary is non-cognition. The arbitrary cannot be tested. It cannot be seen. It cannot be checked. It's just arbitrary. If I tell you there are invisible gremlins under the desk that have there's no way to test their existence. There's no frequency they emit. There's no way I can prove to you or show to you that they exist, but I know that they exist. That's a completely arbitrary statement that has no cognitive value, that has no cognitive place. It is worthless, veridically worthless. And that's absolutely true. So something that is immune from testing. Now, it depends what you mean by testing. Like if I say, this is a bottle of water, you know, or this is white, which is evidence of the senses. What does it mean to prove that it's white? I mean, it is what it is. So, there is such a thing as axiomatic knowledge, but the arbitrary, the thing where I can't say, look, see, and where I can't prove it, where I can't design a test to prove it, where there's not conceivable test of proving it, like the existence of God, is meaningless, and therefore the arbitrary more broadly is cognitively meaningless. This is a point Leonard Peikoff makes in one of his talks. Leonard elaborates on it quite brilliantly. It's definitely worth listening to. All right, Daniel says, we need a rematch with Richard Wolff versus Yaron. Somebody's working on that. Somebody's trying to get me to debate him on some podcast or something. So stay tuned. Who knows? Apollo Zoo says overemphasis on reason and emotional repression. I'm not sure what that means. I guess with regard to friendship, I don't think you can overemphasize reason, but don't emotionally repress. Michael says, would you be willing to work for DailyWire if they let you say whatever you want? Yeah, I might. I worked for, what do you call it, for Glenn Beck's thing for a while, and they didn't pay me just to get to their audience. So I might. It would really depend on the terms more than the money. It would depend on what it means. They would let me say what I want. To what extent did I have to endorse other hosts? To what extent did I have to be nice to other hosts? Could I slam their other hosts? So it would depend on a whole variety of things. And when I worked for Glenn Beck's, what was Glenn Beck's thing? I forget. Basically, I could do whatever I wanted. They had no restrictions on me. And even then, I wasn't 100% comfortable doing it. So I would have to really think about it. Right now, the Blaze. Thank you, Scott. I would have to really think about it. Probably, if the terms are right, but I'm not 100% convinced. All right. Not the average algorithm. Are you no longer frustrated when people don't understand objectivism? How did you become so zen? How can you be frustrated by something that just is? I mean, it's just the reality. I mean, there's a certain, underlying frustration, but I can't be frustrated every single individual who doesn't get objectivism. That's a lot of frustration, much more than I'm willing to bear, much more than the world deserves in a sense to penalize me with. So I'm too selfish to be frustrated by other people's irrationality. Not your average algorithm. Why do you think Ayn Rand resonated with businessmen and the common man more than intellectuals? Intellectuals likely to suffer from an inferiority complex than the general population. I think because the intellectuals had a vested interest in a particular view of the world, and they have a whole structure designed around that is very, very difficult for them to give up. And I think that's a sense that she didn't resonate with them because they were not willing to give up that particular structure approach to the world. And remember, she didn't resonate hugely with businessmen and the common man. Otherwise, the world would be a different place today. I mean, she resonated emotionally. Businessmen are ambitious. They have a sense of self-interest. I think so does the common man in America, and only in America. And I think Ayn Rand would resonate less with Americans today than she did 40, 50 years ago because the sense of life is different. But Ayn Rand resonated with the sense of life that American and independent Americans have. And that sense of life is squeezed out of intellectuals by the philosophy that they have to study and learn and advocate for and teach.
Hey, Yaron.
Yeah.
Why do you think that some immigrants relate to the American sense of life more than native?
Well, because they're self-selecting, because they came here because they were pursuing something that America represents, right? So it's a self-selecting bias. It's not true that if you had random pick up a Nigerian in Nigeria, he will be more of an American than an American. But if a Nigerian makes the effort and goes to all the extent of actually emigrating to the U.S., they are likely to be more of an American in some way than an American born here is, because they are exemplifying those values and they value those values. That's why they came to the United States to begin with. So it's a self-selection bias. All right, Frank asks, Edward de Bono made a case that the arbitrary is a tool of thinking, a provocation for creating new perception that are logical after their creation. Just a thought. Yes, and look, what's his name? Karl Popper, he's huge on the arbitrary. I think they're both wrong. I think they're both wrong. I think the arbitrary is actually destructive because it prohibits, it wastes cognitive effort, wastes time, it wastes energy. By focusing on the arbitrary. I don't think the arbitrary opens up new areas. I think it blocks new areas because it limits your ability to think. So in order to truly open up, one has to be ruthless about what ideas to put aside and what to focus on. And that means ignore the arbitrary and focus on the things that have fact and evidence to support them, even if the fact and evidence are minor, even if they're tiny, even if they're small, even if it's super unlikely, it's still better and it's still worth pursuing as compared to the arbitrary, which should be rejected as quickly and effectively as possible. All right, Scott says, you've said objectivism isn't necessarily synonymous with truth. If the two are shown to diverge, should we go along with the truth objectivism? You've asked this question before. I mean, it's a silly question because there's only one answer to this question, unless you think I'm a mindless moron. But, the only answer to this question is you follow the truth. So, and Ayn Rand would say that is true, and everybody would say that is true. So I don't see the validity of even, and it's not the first time I've been asked this question. It's like, it's a leading question in some unhealthy way. Liam says, do you think DeSantis' strategy of ignoring Trump and being the adult in the room will work? I have no idea. I don't know politics. I don't understand. I mean, the politics of elections of who will win. I'm always wrong. I never believed Trump would win until, I guess in the weeks before the election, I thought he could win. But I don't know. I have no idea what the right strategy is. If I were running, I'd announce early and I would go all out, ruthless, no holds bar destruction of Donald Trump. I would bring up everything, and not everything from his, everything. Everything that he did as president, everything he said leading up to president, what an absolute, idiot he is, but also what a gross, disgusting human being he is. I would bring it all up. I would bring what he said about grabbing, of women and what he said, all of it. I would bring it all out and I would not stop. I would spend significant money in just destroying the guy. And I would do it soon, because once you get up on stage and you haven't said anything negative about Donald Trump, and given how vicious he is, then he is going to steamroll you. He's going to steamroll. So actually, no, I don't think. I knew I had an opinion there somewhere. I don't think it's a good strategy for DeSantis. Daniel, using Leonard Peikoff's dim categories, would all this gender collectivism logically belong under D1, D2? Example, in the manosphere, one encounters many disintegrated ideas, from Freud to Skinner or both, from Nietzsche to Christianity, strikes me as pluralism. Now, remember, again, Christianity, the manosphere is not a set of coherent ideas. So you can't assign, I think this is right. I mean, this is tricky. You can't assign D1 to D2 to just anything. D1 or D2 are cultural movements, cultural phenomena, intellectual, ideological phenomena. The manosphere is a blimp in a culture of disintegration. It's one more form of men separating themselves from women, and another example of not wanting to interact with women, which is an example of disintegration. It's not in and of itself a D. It's an example of the world of Ds, a world full of D. So don't, I think Leonard said once, don't, also with people, he's a D1, he's a D2, he's an M1, he's an M2. That's not what this is for. This is about ideas and movements and cultural phenomena, and which dominate or threaten to dominate or a particular culture, and it is people's generalized attitude towards integration, and whether they are pro-integration or anti-integration. And then if they're pro-integration, whether they believe in integration around reality or an integration around something that is false, like God, right? But are they trying to integrate? Are they trying to explain everything in terms of this idea? And do they believe? Is their whole agenda an agenda of the many, the one in the many, right? Driving everything towards a one, right? And it's not an easy theory. It's not easy to apply. I'm not suggesting I do it right. I don't know, but it's not an easy theory to apply, and you have to be cautious with it. And there are going to be disagreements around it, around how to apply it. And we should all probably read them more than once. I hope that gave you some indication, Daniel. So you know, the whole culture we live in is a culture of disintegration. So it's a D1 culture. It's a culture that doesn't see connections, it doesn't unify, it doesn't integrate. Everything you deal with separately. Frank says, I wish I could afford you to review a dystopian film called A Boy and His Dog from Harlan Ellison. Are these stories hard for you to watch? I don't know. I mean, depends how bad it is, how dystopian it is, how offensive it is. Oh, which reminds me, Jennifer had a question. She emailed me. Let me just get to a question. I don't know that I have an answer. What does it mean when the word intelligence is used in regards to animals? Obviously, a dog is more intelligent than a frog. Doesn't mean a dog can hold more percepts at a time, can learn, has memory, etc. I mean, all of these concepts are difficult when we apply them to animals or to machines, for example. So I don't know the machines learn. I don't know that animals learn in a sense that human beings learn, because for all of them, it involves basically an algorithm running in the background and doing stuff. It is no engaging. There's no learning. There's no, and in that sense, intelligence. There's no initiation. There's no that free will that human beings have that none of these other entities have. They can actually reason. They can actually do things that are not already encoded, that are not coded. So I think it's wrong to use these terms for animals, but to the extent that we do, I think what differentiates animals, and clearly there's difference in animals in terms of their skill set, is exactly that, the skill set, which is their ability to deal with complex situations. So dogs can deal with complex situations, whereas amoebas can't. Amoebas can do one thing, and they just drift around. They can't even really self-propel in any kind of way. But dogs can look around. They can decide, not really decide. But they go in different paths. They integrate a lot more information into their processing powers. They have a better processor. They have a more powerful chip inside, and therefore they can process more information and therefore deal with a lot greater complexity. And that's the difference between a frog and a dog and a chimpanzee, who can process even more information and can, maybe even come close to being cognition, right? Come close to forming a concept in some very, very primitive sense, but not quite, right? When you hear about language in apes or in chimpanzees. So it's about the processing power. And in that sense, it's very similar to AI, I think. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we got 4 quick super chat questions, and then we'll 5, and then we'll call it a day. All right, what's the relation between lack of integration and the primacy of consciousness mindset? Oh God, it's a great question, but I don't know that I have answers. Lack of integration and primacy of consciousness mindset. I mean, if you have a primacy of consciousness mindset, what exactly are you integrating? You're not integrating facts out there from reality. You're not integrating evidence that you're receiving. Whatever you're integrating is just internal to your own consciousness. And therefore, it really is an integration, because integration has to be connected to reality. It has to connect things that are in reality. A primacy of consciousness mentality, I think, is just moving symbols around inside your head, and it's not real integration. The best that I can do on the fly. Mick Finn, is Japan a better country to live in right now? Average salary is 100K. Average salary is not 100K. Average median salary is 20K. So they're 5 times poorer than you thought they were. Japan's pretty poor. I mean, I've seen this from economists writing about it, people who travel through Japan and look at how Japanese live. They live in very small homes. They drive small cars. They don't have the kind of luxuries we have. They don't take the kind of stuff we take for granted in terms of the way and the style that we live. They don't travel as much as Americans do. They just have significantly less income. Is it a better country right now? The only dimension I think in which it's better, well, maybe a few dimensions, but one is crime. It's unbelievably safe. There's basically no violent crime in Japan, or very little. Food, they have phenomenal food. Friend Harper says they have anime. I guess that's good. I don't get anime. It's clean. You know, things like that. But yeah. I mean, but Japan is not. I think people somehow have a misconception. Japan needs capitalism. It needs capitalism to get rich. Paulo Zeus, perceptual information that gets absorbed without conscious recognition. Yeah, I mean, that gets absorbed. Yes, we do see things that we don't immediately consciously identify, that we can sometimes recall from memory. I think that happens. I think that gets implanted somewhere in the brain, that we saw something even though we don't say, oh, we don't recognize it in the moment consciously. Michael says, why is it so unusual for people to see that ideas have consequences? Because ideas are very abstract. And indeed, I think it's very complicated to see that ideas have consequences, right? I mean, America is statist, and yet life seems pretty good. So why are you guys constantly harping on the fact that statism is so destructive when life is actually pretty good? And look, we just showed a graph where America is the richest of the developed world. America is the richest country in the world. So stop, so the way ideas impact the world, impact reality, is complicated and complex and nuanced, and you have to be able to show it. You have to be able to show it over the scope of history. You have to be able to show it in the short term and long term, and it ain't easy. It ain't easy. Friend Harper says, compared to ancient cultures, would you say it's much easier to apply dim to the past as compared to the present, more recent? Japan, via anime, produces a lot of cultural products that vary in dim identities. Yeah, but that's why you can't take a product. A product doesn't have a dim identity. I don't think Leonard would think that a product had a dim identity. I mean, unless it was a Victor Hugo novel, or it was some broad scope type of thing, right? And even then, you would say Les Miserables is integrated, but the dim hypothesis doesn't apply to Les Miserables. The dim hypothesis applies to, is Les Miserables a dominant feature of art in France in the 19th century, and what does that mean vis-a-vis the culture? But it's very difficult to identify the dim hypothesis generally. It's very difficult to do it for the present because there's so many things going on right now. How does one step out of the present to look at the present and see what's going on? It's not easy. There are lots of currents that are underground that we don't see that turn out to be dominant. Did we see the Tea Party turning into Trumpists? No, not until Trump got elected. Where did the Tea Party go? Oh, they all became Trumpists, and some of them completely mindless Trumpists. I mean, that was a cultural phenomena that was right in front of our noses. And first of all, it didn't manifest itself until Trump showed up, and then it was hard to understand what was going on in the present. So, and where are we heading now? And what are the leading ideologies that are driving things under the surface where we So it's much easier to do this on historical analysis than on the present. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panel. Thanks for all the support you guys provide on a monthly basis. Really, really appreciate that. If you guys want to support the Yaron Brook Show on a monthly basis, you want to join the panel, you can do so on yaronbrookshow.com/support. Patreon, Subscribe Star, even locals. But Patreon, Subscribe Star, and PayPal are the three main. Somebody asked me today about doing it on a Venmo. You can do it on Venmo. It's Brook Media. Brook Media is my handle. At Brook Media is the handle on Venmo if you want to send support. Thank you to all the super chatters. And we will have a members only show tomorrow. Members only show tomorrow. There's still plenty of time to become a member at 1 p.m. East Coast time, 1 p.m. East Coast time. And then we'll be back to our daily shows on Monday. So you can still become a member. It's just $5 a month. You can do that by pressing the join button right underneath the video. Bye, everybody. I will see you all tomorrow or next week. Thank you.
Bye, Aaron. Have a good day.